It's a wonderful story. So my mother's very small, and I weighed 10 pounds. I was a very large baby. Uh, this will make all the women, or at least all the mothers, cringe. And I was trying to be born. My mother had the next to the rarest kind of blood, and the hospital had none of her blood on hand, so they could not do a C-section. And I'm told, six obstetricians tried to deliver me without any success. And the nurse in the delivery room called her friend, who was a pediatrician, and said, "Get over here, this woman needs help." And so he got me out. But in doing so, I was massively injured. I was completely paralyzed on my right side, and my head was all crushed in and misshapen. And so they literally came out and told my father that my mother was probably going to die, and I definitely was, and they needed a name for my birth and death certificates. And they had come up with a girl's name, Vicki Gene. My father's name was Victor, my mother's name is Imogene. And in his distress, and of course being worried about my mother, instead of just sort of making up a name, he just changed the spelling on Vicki Gene to Vickygene, and thought it wouldn't matter on a tombstone. And so that's the name that got put on my birth certificate. And it's I was in an incubator for about a month, and finally came out of the paralysis. They gave me to my parents, again, who were very poor, tenant farmers, and said, you know, he probably won't live very long, but if he does live, he will be a total vegetable. He'll never walk or talk or have any sense of himself. And so they just took me home and loved me. When I was in the 7th grade, middle school, I toyed with the idea of changing my name. I grew up in the South, and in the southern part of the United States, everyone is called two names, Billy Bob or something like that. So I was Vicki Gene. That was my name. And it's a terrible way to grow up as a boy.
You were the boy named Sue.
Yes, a boy named Sue. I am like the living reality of that. And so I was going to change my name. I never got around to it. I mean, I never finalized it. My parents were fine with my doing it. What I do remember is at about age 12 or 13, being with a group of my friends, and somehow they had secured a Playboy magazine. And they were clearly very excited by these photographs. And, they really weren't doing anything for me. And it was at that moment, I certainly did not put a label on it, but I thought, oh my God, I think I'm different. And almost simultaneously realized that to say that these pictures weren't doing for me what they were doing for my friends, was dangerous. What I do remember is at about age 12 or 13, being with a group of my friends, and somehow they had secured a Playboy magazine, and they were clearly very excited by these photographs, and they really weren't doing anything for me. And it was at that moment, I certainly did not put a label on it, but I thought, oh my God, I think I'm different. And almost simultaneously realized that to say that these pictures weren't doing for me what they were doing for my friends, was dangerous. So by the time I got to seminary, it was very clear that I had a problem. I very much wanted a wife and children, and so I got into therapy to cure myself. Not cure myself, but to be aided in my healing. But he very much took me at my word that I wanted to be able to have a good and healthy and wholesome relationship with a woman. And so for twice a week, for 2 years, I worked very hard at that. and came to a place where I felt that that kind of relationship was indeed possible. And I took a year off from seminary between my second and third years to do an intern year as the chaplain at the University of Vermont. And it was there that I met the woman who would later become my wife. And but within 2 or 3 weeks of meeting her, I shared with her that you know, what relationships I'd had been with men, that I had gotten into therapy about this, and that I felt ready for such a relationship. So she knew from the very beginning. You know, liking women was never a problem. I had wonderful friends who were female in my high school years and beyond. And in some ways, I think the relationship between gay men and women tends to be good, because I think women don't experience the kind of sexual tension that they do with heterosexual males. So the level of intimacy is often very, very good between straight women and gay men. And so it was just a matter of thinking through what had led to my attraction to men, and more than making that go away, I think it must have been just exploring how a good relationship with a woman might. I loved her. I still love her. We're still in touch on a very regular basis. She's had some health problems, and one of her sons, she married very soon after we were divorced, and had 2 sons, and you know, one of them was in a car accident. I went to visit him, and I know them both, and so that relationship continues to be very good.
When did you come out within your marriage, or when did you?
Well, I was sort of never not out, in the sense of having shared this struggle with her, and I remember maybe a month before our marriage, getting really frightened that this might come back to threaten our marriage, and and I remember she said to me, you know, if that happens, then we love each other enough to deal with it. And indeed we did. We were married 13 years. And towards the end of that time, it became increasingly clear to me and to her that we were both paying a terrible price for this. And that that perhaps she deserved the opportunity to be with a man for whom this was not a struggle, and that I deserved to see if I could make a life with another man. And so the decision to separate and then divorce was really a decision for each other. There was no one else involved, not for me, not for her. It was a decision that we made for our own health and well-being. And in an odd way, we felt it was a fulfillment of our marriage vows. We have this these words that go with the exchange of rings. I give you this ring as a symbol of my vow, and with all that I am and all that I have, I honor you in the name of God. And we felt this was the way we could honor each other in the name of God. And now, all these years later, I'm so glad I didn't change it. I love it. It's a sort of a part of who I am. And another sort of a coda to that story. When I was about 13 years old, this same pediatrician who had delivered me and became my pediatrician, and every time I had gone to see him, he said, you sure look better than the first time I saw you. And then he would say, I had help from above when I delivered you. I didn't know what he meant by that, but when I was about 13, he sat down with me and said, I'm going to tell you something that I've never even told your parents. And he said, I just shudder to tell you this, but I think you ought to know. He said, you were so certainly going to die in my mind. and you looked so horrific. He said, you looked like a little monster. Your head was just totally mashed in. And he said, all I could think of was your 20-year-old mother looking at your misshapen head in your little coffin. And he said, I took my hands and I mushed your head back together into as round a shape as I could make it. He said, I'm totally horrified. He said, I never thought you would live. I would never have done such a thing. I was just thinking of your mother and the horror that she would experience looking at you. And so I literally mashed your head back together into as round a shape as possible.